Sam Harris wrote a book, The Moral Landscape, which was a runaway bestseller, and which set out to prove that science itself can give you a morality. There's no need for God. However, in the process of doing so, because of his moral system that he outlines, when you take it to its logical conclusion, you'll find that he actually requires you to have a God in order for his system to work, which I'm pretty sure he didn't set out intending to do. I'll outline it for you here, what I'm talking about, and it'll at least be amusing, unless you're Dr. Harris, and then it'll just be annoying. So in his book, The Moral Landscape, Sam Harris lays out a very common sense approach to morality. He says that like health is a fuzzy concept, but science can still tell us meaningful things about health. Morality can be a fuzzy concept, but science can still tell us very meaningful things about that morality. Like in health, vomiting all the time is unhealthy. So too in morality is something like the worst possible misery for everyone is an absolute zero kind of on the moral scale, which, I mean, that has merit. I don't think that you can argue that point. It makes a lot of sense. So let's plot this on a graph. 0 is our worst misery for everybody. The y-axis, or upwards in a direction, is the moral values. So let's say humans are 0 to 10 on our moral value scale when we solve the measurement problem. Your x-axis is each individual person. So there may be billions of people out there. And then your z-axis, or coming towards you, is just time. And so the surface that you get is in fact the moral landscape. And you can calculate the total value of the moral landscape. You can calculate global well-being by integrating under the curve, and that'll give you a value. So this is a really good mathematical, scientific way of looking at morality. So far, so good. So here's where it gets interesting. If you ask an astrophysicist today, they will tell you it's a virtual certainty that life exists in other places in the universe. And it's not unreasonable to assume that, given the size of the universe. So imagine that one day in the future, one of these alien spacecraft enters orbit around the Earth and puts out a call to our great scientists and world leaders, and they invites them up to the ship. And they go up to the ship and they meet the aliens, and they find out a very interesting fact. Because we now have solved the measurement problem, turns out these aliens are very efficient beings, and they're very happy beings. On a well-being scale, if humans max out at 10, these aliens max out at 100. The Dalai Lama on his best day is like one of these guys having a bad day. So they are literally 10 times more happy than we are. And they're more efficient than we are. So they can live on the same resources we do for 100 years longer than we do. And there's a finite amount of resources, and this becomes important. If you consider the fact that there are a finite amount of resources here, and that these aliens have so much a greater capacity for moral well-being, you realize it becomes the moral duty of our world leaders and scientists to help the aliens commit genocide. Why? Because if you show the two graphs, our graph ends up with a certain integral. When you integrate their graph, the value is 10 times greater than ours. It literally, you increase global well-being by a factor of 10 by exterminating human beings and keeping the aliens. It is our job morally, according to Dr. Harris, to maximize global well-being. If you even leave a single human alive, you're using resources that one of these aliens could use that much more efficiently and would be that much more happy using it. So you'll see it becomes our moral duty as a scientist or a world leader to aid the aliens in destroying the entire human race. Do you see where this leads us? In order to decide things like, is genocide right or wrong? Does it maximize global well-being or does it reduce global well-being? You actually have to know whether these kinds of aliens exist, whether they are within range of us, whether they will reach us at some time in the future. If you don't know that, then there's no way for you to make a moral call on whether the continued existence of the human race is morally good or is morally bad. Now, what kind of being is omniscient and knows everything about all places in the universe and can also see through time? I can only think of one. Turns out that's the only being that is qualified to tell you whether your course of action is morally right in committing genocide or morally wrong in committing genocide. Or, even more interestingly, whether it's your moral duty to commit genocide, because that will maximize global well-being. Now, I can only think of one possible omniscient, see-through time type of being, and it's commonly called God. As it turns out, the moral landscape requires this omniscient being that can see through time in order to make moral pronouncements. I don't think that there are many theists out there that would disagree with that statement, and I don't think that that's what Dr. Harris set out to prove. The moral landscape has been widely criticized by experts in philosophy and theology, philosophy of science particularly, those minds are much more brilliant than I will ever be. So if a guy like me can point out that Dr. Harris set out to prove that the moral landscape shows that a God isn't necessary, and ends up at the end requiring there to be a God in order for the moral landscape to work at all, it just goes a long way to show how easy it is to criticize the moral landscape. It's as easy as, I don't know, it's pretty easy.